So let's start today with some good news. You and I recently drove a magical vehicle from the Volkswagen Group, a station wagon. An incredibly fast station wagon. However, there's also some bad news to report. The largest growing segment of passenger vehicle in the US today by sales volume is the C-segment crossover. Now, not very exciting for a car guy to admit this, especially when the two best sellers in this fastest growing segment are this one and then this one. But there was a respite in this segment. It was also by the Volkswagen Group. It was screwed together pretty well, and the driving dynamics really were pretty good. However, when it came to sales, definitely an also-ran. So the Volkswagen folks, they didn't take too kindly to this, and they decided to change everything about the new Tiguan. So our job today is to determine, is it now running with the big dogs, or is it still an also-ran? So first things first, let's geek out over a bit of engine technology. In the tech review, I told you that this derivation of E888 uses a modified version of the Miller cycle. Now a bit of a recap. Miller cycle and the somewhat related Atkinson cycle engines adjust valve timing, specifically when the valves open or close, to impact combustion cycle, compression cycle, as well as airflow, with a goal towards improving overall efficiency at the cost of total engine output. Now in traditional Miller cycle engines, that power loss is made up by a supercharger. In a hybrid, it's made up by electric motors. But what Volkswagen engineers did in this specific application is pair a turbocharger with their own derivation of variable valve timing. At its heart is a camshaft with two lobes. When the vehicle is under low load, it's in its modified Miller cycle, what they call a Budek cycle, which closes the valve sooner to increase efficiency. But when there's more load, it moves the camshaft over to the side, keeps the valves open longer, thus the engine operates in an Otto cycle for more power. Okay, now that we got all that confusion out of the way, let's find out how it works. So I am now in, the Eco mode. It's a fancy Mercedes convertible that goes past us. We're going to take this minivan on, put our foot into it, and this is the Eco mode. In no stretch of the imagination is this thing slow. It gets off the line. It's exactly what it is intended to do, especially when a smart car tries to cut you off. It's rough. That's the dirty little secret no one tells you about Miller cycle engines. Remember the Mazdas back in, the early 90s? They had the Miller cycle engines. And the concept is very much about efficiency, which I can see what Volkswagen is trying to do here. No matter how many times I've been driving this thing, and I've been driving it, a week now, I can't help but get this out of my head. And it doesn't matter what mode you're in. So I'm switching from Eco to normal, and the normal, there's really no difference between Eco and normal. The power delivery is the same, the acceleration is the same. I would argue you got to go all the way up to Sport to get this thing to not feel, again, sluggish ain't it, slow ain't it. It's rough the way it delivers power. The engine sounds like it's straining. Here it doesn't. Here it is now programmed like any other 2-liter direct injected E888 Volkswagen engine. Practicality. It can mean a lot of things, but in this segment, it has everything to do with how many Rugrats and their stuff can you shoehorn into your tall Sentra or Civic. That translates to wheelbase and length. So as a basis of comparison, the Rogue has a 106.5-inch wheelbase and 184.5-inch length. The CR-V, 104.7 and 180.6 respectively. Now the old Tiguan, that was the runt of the litter. 102.5-inch wheelbase with 174.5-inch length. And this is while Wolfsburg made an unprecedented change. The wheelbase has now up to 109.8, and the overall length increased over 10 inches, 185.1. So the theme of our story today, the also-ran of the C-segment crossover world. Driving dynamics, that really didn't apply in the previous one. It was the Volkswagen, and we can complain about all sorts of things like Miller cycle engines, but at the end of the day, the driving dynamics, that wasn't the problem. That was definitely above ran, not also ran. So let's get off this main road and try it again as it's intended around town. So we're on the border of Hermosa and Manhattan Beach here. Let's duck in and out of the neighborhoods here. Even though we're down on horsepower in this engine, it still drives very much like a Volkswagen, which is to say a good thing. And I would argue it's a refreshing change from a Rogue, a Honda CR-V, any one of these cars, even, well, it's not quite a Range Rover that's blocking the street here, and she just decides to, well, welcome to Manhattan Beach. That's the kind of thing that happens around here. Okay, let's duck into a tight street here, and this is where you notice the difference in driving dynamics. It was already good in the previous Tiguan, but what has changed is you now have a longer wheelbase. So when you get around tighter streets like this, a lot of stop and go traffic, or trying to get in and out of tight spots like this is where you notice the longer wheelbase, and it does make the whole package more supple. So as much as I love geeking out about combustion cycles, long wheelbases, and driving dynamics, we need to get down to the brass tacks of why the previous Tiguan wasn't also ran in this segment. But to do that, we need to look at the sales figures of the two perennial favorites that we alluded to at the top of the episode. Let's start with the Rogue. So Nissan shifted 329,000 new Rogues in all of 2016. Honda beat them by almost 10% with 357,000 new CR-Vs on the road. The Volkswagen, in all of 2016, sold 43,638. Put another way, it took Honda 1.5 months to sell as many CR-Vs as Volkswagen sold Tiguans in all of 2016. Okay, as we get up the hill here in Hermosa Beach, I think elevation a whopping 120 feet, a couple of notes. Number one, as you can see, car fitted with Apple CarPlay. Very good thing. The Volkswagen engineers, like the other ones, have integrated quite well. It is still maddening to use because of the Apple engineers. The voice recognition is painful in virtually every car I've driven at this point. I'm at this point pleading, please fix it. Number two, you might remember from the Porsche Macan Turbo with Performance Package episode that I shared with you some information from my lady friend that the big yoga bottle that she had fit in the cup holder of that car. Just barely, that's the asterisk there. Here, actually I should step back. I got yelled at for bringing that bottle on camera. So she gave me my own. I have my own very yellow yoga bottle, and I kind of love it, actually. I hate to admit it. But this, I'm shocked, man. It actually fits really well in the door pockets. Like, that is me being about as prudent as I can be. And then last, but certainly not least, is the fuel economy. Now, if I'm being honest, the biggest complaint in the area is that Miller cycle engine and how it delivers power. Again, for the avoidance of doubt, it's not slow. It doesn't have that legendary born from GTI goodness. But I will say, man, it works. I'm driving around town in a vehicle that has a single propulsion system, and I've done nothing but around town driving. I have not seen one freeway in the entire week that I've had this thing. And you see, this is all I've been doing. Right now it's showing 17.8 mpg, but for the entire week that I've had it, I've done 19.8 mpg in town. Now, the U.S. federal government says this thing is good for 21 around town. So yeah, I'm lower than around town, but then again, you've never known me to drive a car prudently. So let me demonstrate how I've been driving it and why I got 19.8 and why I think that is a very good return. Bist du fertig? Foot to the floor, Miller cycle engine, 184 fire-breathing horsepower. Okay, so what's the moral of our story? Still an also-ran or head and shoulders above the crowd? Well, there are definitely some rough edges here that could use some smoothing out. However, the cheapskate in me has to admit, the efficiency works and without the cost of an additional propulsion system. Then there's the driving dynamics, and I would argue the big dogs of the world, the CR-Vs, the Rogues, they don't quite understand Wolfsburg in this area, at least the drivers of the big dogs. So back to our original question, also ran we're head and shoulders above the crowd. I would argue it now runs with the big dogs. In fact, it's probably a little bit ahead of the pack. Until I see you next time, bis später.